First, to analyze behavior, we must look at the young. Even though the first dinosaur eggs to be discovered and described were in 1859 by the Roman Catholic priest Jean-Jacques Poech, there has not been enough scientific attention given to dinosaur eggs. There has been a very limited amount of paleobiological information that has come from the study of fossil eggs, nests, and eggshells, which spurred this group of paleontologists to address the issue by whether detailed oological observations can lead to new paleobiological findings about the reproductive behaviors of dinosaurs. The group was hopeful there would be information about their metabolism and more about which particular group of non-avian theropods is more closely related to birds. Although there have been many dinosaur eggs discovered in the past century, the paleontologists chose specimens to investigate that represent a set of well-documented fossils, all of which are now curated in museums. The group developed a research question, which was, how do Mesozoic Saurischian egg materials compare to extant crocodilians and avians? Saurischian dinosaurs were the earliest dinosaurs and ancestors of birds. The paleontologists created their paleobiological interpretation of the Mesozoic Saurischian egg materials based on either the presence of embryos in the egg or brooding adults in egg clutches, which is when the adults sit upon the eggs to hatch them. The parents may brood eggs during the incubation period to keep them protected and also warm until they are ready to hatch. The species studied in this investigation are from many different regions of the globe and are listed on the screen here now. The paleontologists observed the egg material on the specimens that were acquired by the authors themselves, as well from various museums, donations from institutions, and private collectors. Each specimen was tested and examined with several tools and methods that complement each other in reaching a description of the eggshell morphology. Scanning electron microscopy, or commonly referred to in the field as SEM, allows us to observe the samples at various magnifications. SEM reveals the tridimensional details of the microcrystalline arrangement within the shell units, as well as the presence and thickness of structural layers. The trouble with SEM is that it is highly dependent on the quality and the orientation of the fracture of the eggshell specimen. Other microscopies, such as TLM and PLM, aren't able to offer a three-dimensional view, but are able to better observe some of the structures that SEM cannot. When clutches are preserved, numbers of eggs, their spatial arrangement, which is the number of egg rows and whether eggs fill up the entire clutch area, and the orientation of their long axis and reference to the sediment surface were noted. The paleontologists also measured the egg length, diameter, shell thickness, and shell structural layers of all specimens. The results of this investigation were quite interesting and useful. Eggs and eggshells, by their shape, structure, and microstructure, are excellent paleobiological indicators and present innovative aspects of the Saurischian evolution. They found many oological characters and reproductive behaviors associated with modern birds. There is a reproductive evolutionary decline from crocodilians to modern birds, with a quite noticeable pattern of simultaneous development between the deposits of eggshell layers, origination, and size increase of larger air cells, and brooding behaviors. The reproductive features that evolved in concert with oviraptorids might have gradually evolved from more basal theropod clades. The importance of small-bodied theropods cannot be dismissed, and their eggs could suggest closer phylogenetic ties to aves than trunitids. There is a strong possibility that the evolution of these reproductive features is concurrent with profound physiological and metabolic changes that occurred in Saurischian dinosaurs throughout their evolution.
Once the egg is hatched, we focus on juvenile behavior found in a mud-trapped herd of the S-donkey. Fossils leave behind more than just a footprint, but evidence of behavior. Understanding behavior is important in understanding how species communicated, gathered food, and more. The question is then asked, what impact does sociality, if any at all, have on the development of dinosaurs? Researchers examined 13 fossils and found that they found in the Gobi Desert. The fossils were the remains of the Sinomorphous donkey. These surprisingly well-preserved fossils were made of red mudstone and siltstone. All fossils were considered juvenile, which researchers defined as 7 years or younger in age. Evidence indicates that these fossils could be as old as 92 MA. The position of these fossils was very important because it indicates their resting position when they died. 12 of 13 were well preserved with an articulated pelvis and a lifelike structure. Though they were well preserved, there was some variation among the fossils due to scavengers, weathering, and transportation of the body post-mortem. To gain a visual of their positions of death, refer to the diagram shown in the introductory slide. Three methods were used to examine fossils. First, cross-sections were used to prepare each element using standard paleobiological histologic techniques. To determine the age of death and that these were juvenile S. donkeys, researchers used annual lines of arrested growth. Finally, histology was used that was consistent with showing that each was consistent with each individual, indicating they're from the same herd. Evidence from the fossils indicates that the juvenile herd of the S. donkey were traveling across a lake that had evaporated due to a drought. The lake was not completely dry, and to the S. donkey's surprise, it was very muddy. When they stepped in the mud, they became entrapped in waterlogged sediments, thus becoming immobile. Ultimately, the juveniles died from dehydration, starvation, or predation after becoming stuck in the mud. Because there were 13 fossils that died on a single bedding plane facing southeast, this indicated that there was a mass mortality. It is important to note that mass mortalities indicate social behavior. This shows evidence of herding behavior and synchronous mortality. There is large evidence that the S. donkey arrived and died together. These were mobile dinosaurs. The mothers would lay eggs but did not provide much parental care. Instead of being taken care of by their mothers, juveniles were very social and traveled together to take care and support each other. There was evidence that they also matured slowly. Consequently, due to the combination of slow maturation and traveling in herds, the S. donkey population had a higher mortality rate of juveniles.
And now for something completely different. So today it's difficult to discern the posture of early mammals because, according to the authors of my research paper, the reconstruction of the posture of fossil mammals is possible only when the entire or almost entire postcranial or below skull skeleton is known, and especially if it shows similarities to those of any modern mammals. This is why multituberculates are used in this research paper, because they have the best fossil skeletons but also no living relatives. Multituberculates are a group of rodent-like mammals that are different from rodents themselves. They lived in burrows or trees, and they also have the longest mammalian fossil record. These rodents went extinct due to competition from the actual rodents, which went on to evolve to what we know today. So the question that this research paper asks is whether early mammals had a sprawling or parasagittal posture, and multituberculates will be used as a point of reference since they have the best fossil record. So the authors of the paper reconstructed the multituberculate foot using results from previous studies looking for any discernible clues in the limbs and shoulders that pointed to a sprawling or parasagittal stance. They made observations of most complete postcranial skeletons, and they just analyzed from there. So, from the results of the analysis, the paper supports the earlier hypothesis that multituberculate hind limbs were sprawling. Still, it can't be said for certain whether the forelimbs had a more parasagittal posture than the hind limbs. The authors say, however, that parasagittal stance developed once in the evolution of mammals in early Boreosphenidans. Also, the parasagittal stance developed, or it's possible that all mammals with spurred feet similar to the multituberculous also had sprawling hind limbs.
For as long as animals have roamed the earth, there have been instances of fighting and combat. Survival of the fittest has been a prevalent idea in our explanation of the evolution of species. In many cases, what deems a certain species fit depends on their ability to win in battles, many of which can lead to the death of a combatant. In this journal, scientists have taken advantage of their knowledge on the fossil record in order to determine how exactly certain animals use parts of their bodies to fight one another, and what body structures are often mistaken as being used for combat. The questions we were trying to answer are what types of structures they use for fighting purposes, what are the reasons they would fight, and what kind of weapons do these dinosaurs use. So the species they observed were all ornithischians, and they include the Heterodontosauri, which have canine-like teeth, the Stegosauria, which have body plates and spiked tails, the Iguanodontia, which have thumb spikes, the Ankylosauria, which have club tails, the Paleophaleosauria, which have dome-shaped skulls, and the Ceratopsia, which have horns. In order to examine how these species use their bodies for combat, a group of scientists used three types of methods. The first method scientists used was analogy. By looking at animals currently in existence, one is able to examine their combat methods and draw parallels between similar body structures of both ancient and current species. For example, if we were to look at elephants, we would be able to compare their large size and tusks to that of an ancient mammoth and draw similarities between the two to see how mammoths use the same characteristics. We also use digital simulations to help lay out and recreate patterns in which dinosaurs acted and responded to one another in combat. These simulations are also useful because they allow us to determine whether it's possible or realistic for a certain body structure to be used as a method of combat. Lastly, since the fossil record does a good job showing the beatings taken by these dinosaurs, such as a broke-off piece of bone or injury to the head, etc., scientists can sometimes piece evidence together to come to the conclusion that these instances were a result of fights that had occurred, and they can often determine how fighting made it happen. So the results are that in Heterosauria, scientists have found that not all members of the species contain caniform teeth. This occurrence is not explained through the means of sexual dimorphism, but rather a result of phylogeny and chance. This helps lead scientists to believe that these teeth were used to either hunt prey rather than actually fight. In Stegosauria, thick body plates are present, but their primary purpose is to regulate temperature and preserve body heat. However, when it comes to their spiked tails, they are most likely used as a means of combat, especially their tails have the power to pierce bones, since their tails have the power to pierce bones. In Iguanodontia, thumb spikes are used as more of a defensive feature rather than offensive, and are used in interspecific combat, meaning combat between different species. Also, these spikes are able to assist individuals for their mating endeavors. Ankylosauria's willingness to fight using its club tail depends on its size. If the club is large enough and likely to break the bone, it will most likely fight. However, if it is relatively small, then it will not fight often, but they can still use their club as a means to attract predators. Paleophalosauria, stone-shaped skulls, provide a means of combat through the ramming of heads. This claim is supported because of the lesions on their heads as a result of fighting. Parallels drawn from similar fighting tactics of sheep and goats. Ceratopsia use their horns as a means of defending themselves Because a parallel is drawn between these species and chameleons, it is likely that it was also used as a means of interspecific combat, meaning combat between individuals of the same species. In conclusion, it is safe to say that while many species use weapon-like structures for combat, we cannot assume that they automatically will because they look intimidating. Also, they have other non-combat uses.